All right, I think we are live. And hi everyone, Petrik here. Today, in today's video, I will be having a live stream and live conversation with my friend Alex from Tall Guy Reads. And yeah, today's video will be talking about Dragonbone Chair by Ted Williams. This is the first book in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. Do know that if you haven't read the book yet, there will be spoilers in this discussion on the Dragonbone Chair, not for the rest of the series, but yeah, on the Dragonbone Chair. And I hope all of you will join this read along to be talking about the book with us because both of us actually really love the Dragonbone Chair, right, Alex?
Oh yeah, it was awesome. So glad I
Yeah,
finally read it. It's been sitting on my shelf for like years. Feels like.
yeah, I know that's the same for me too. And speaking about that, how did you find out about the series anyway? Like, what made you really finally want to read it?
Yeah. Well, I think the first time I heard about it was after reading A Song of Ice and Fire. I think
Ah,
that probably seems like a lot of people hear about it that way. I think Song of Ice and Fire was the first big adult fantasy series outside of like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that I was reading that I read, and that was probably right when the show came out, so 2011. And so as I was reading that series, I was looking up other epic fantasy series like it, and this one kept coming up all the time. But I
ah,
never read it, and then it wasn't until I think once I found BookTube and I started seeing people talk about it. I think Jimmy read it like on the Fantasy Network, read it like a year and a half, 2 years ago, and loved it. And so once I saw him really enjoyed it, I know Mike read it like last year or something like that, maybe, or I don't know when it was, but it just slowly kept creeping up my TBR. Like, okay, this is a trilogy I need to read, but it just felt like there were so many other epic fantasy series I hadn't read that I needed to catch up on, and this one just unfortunately kept getting like put down the list. And then I was like, this is over. Like this, I need to read this series, and
yeah.
I'm
It's
so
really
happy we finally did.
it's really funny because I know not only the two of us faced that experience with this trilogy. Like we know about this, we always wanted to read it, but we just did not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like Tad Williams has so many. I mean, I don't know. I feel like he has a lot of books. I feel like anytime I go into a used bookstore, I see his other land books a lot, and I see kind of like the sequel series to this trilogy. And so I always knew like the Dragonbone Chair is where to start, but until I actually looked at like the structure of the series, I was like, I don't know. It seems like it's confusing, like Shadow
Yeah.
March. Like, how does all this stuff fit in? And I was like, yeah.
Mine is really kind of the same for you, though. I mean, the reason behind why I finally, you know what, I really have to read this series is really because of A Song of Ice and Fire. Like, I mean, I know that many of us became a fantasy reader because of that series, whether it's Game of Thrones, the TV show, or maybe the
Yep.
books, Song of Ice and Fire. And George R. R. Martin, not only him, Patrick Rothfuss as well, constantly mentioned that how this series really inspired them to write their magnum opus. But somehow, it's kind of weird, isn't it, that Memory, Sorrow, and Dawn is not as famous as those two, just for comparison.
I know. I agree, and it is interesting because
Yeah,
and confusing because I was reading this book and I was like, this literally has everything that people seem to be looking for a lot of the time, and
yeah.
it's always like kind of swept under the rug compared to those other series. And I don't know. I think something that a lot of people in our Discord that were talking when they were reading this were saying was that you could just tell how much Tad Williams loves fantasy and like how much he loves to write fantasy because he was just
Yeah.
going like through his prose in this book. He was just felt like he was very happy writing this series, and that made me happy reading it. So even in the parts where it was like, oh, this, I can see why some people would consider this like a slow part of this book.
Yeah.
I was really enjoying it. So I don't understand. I don't know why it's not more famous. I don't know if that's a marketing thing or like just maybe some of the other series that came after it kind of just got so big. Like A Song of Ice and
Mhm.
Fire is like just a huge series in terms of popularity and sales and stuff that I don't know. It just might be hard for it to be
Yeah, and also, I mean,
raise awareness.
yeah, I mean, this one came out in 1988, right? It is classic. It is. I think it can be classified as a classic, and I think it's just. I don't know. There must be plenty of circumstances regarding this, but I think somehow Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn just did not pop up in during the burst of social media, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the main reasons. But it's really weird though, because yeah, this one definitely inspired A Song of Ice and Fire in plenty of ways, just from just that one example. So let's talk about that. How do you think one example? How do you think memories Dragonbone chair? Sorry, the Dragonbone chair inspired, let's say, a Game of Thrones.
Well, I think there are definitely tie-ins. I think there are things in the Dragonbone chair that reminded me of parts of A Song of Ice and Fire. So there was like this whole ancient race of people in the north and that were coming back and returning
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, this reminded me of the others. And then there was just little things. Like I know they kept making, there was a whole quote about like, that was very similar to Tyrion's famous quote about literature and knowledge and how
Yeah.
if you read your like that's his weapon and stuff like that. And I remember that. I think that was Morgani's in the beginning of the book. He made a similar quote like that, and I was like, that sounds very familiar. And there was like a hound helmet. I think someone had a hound helmet that just they kept referencing that, and I was like, okay, I see that. And also just the princess, I guess, Elias's daughter, how she like pretended to be a boy and then fought her way out, like to kind of go on this own adventure and leave Elias. Reminded me of Arya in some ways, and just like what she has to go through and at the end of a Game of Thrones and into the sequel books. Like I don't think it's really on the nose a lot of the time, but you can just see how different authors got inspiration for their series in different ways.
I also think that, I mean, whether they realize it or not, I feel like there's so many in current modern fantasy that felt like it originated from the Dragonbone chair, something like that. Like in the Game of Thrones, the Iron Throne and also the Dragonbone chair.
That was 100. The Dragonbone chair. I was like, literally, I was reading the scene setting for the throne room and all this stuff, and I was like, I feel like I'm reading Fire and Blood. Like this is just,
it's pretty cool though. It's really pretty cool.
Oh yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, and I think there's also I messaged you about this. It's something like about the comet thing, like the comet that bleeds across the sky.
Oh yes.
Oh my God,
it was like a red.
So reminiscent of the prologue in Clash of Kings. So good. It's so good.
Yeah, it was awesome. I also I really love epic fantasy that kind of goes full tilt into world building and like having this world that has a bunch of history in it and like ancient history and a world that's so old that the people that are living it in the time that you're reading about don't even fully believe or feel like they understand stuff that happened in the past. And you see that with like A Song of Ice and Fire, obviously, but you see it here too. And I think this is just something that happens in epic fantasy that I enjoy. And a lot of epic fantasy, I feel like kind of skips over this whole world building aspect. And I know it, it can cause the books to be longer and feel slower at times, but I really like it. And I think Tad Williams nailed that. And I could see why like George R. R. Martin and even other authors like Robert Jordan and stuff like definitely took inspirations from it when they were building their world.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, this comment is actually pretty correct. George Martin using his influence is one of his strengths. I think so, because
I agree.
It never felt like George Martin actually copied or something. It really felt like he's just inspired by it and put it into his stories. It's really well done.
It's like you could tell what he loves in the books that he reads, and then he brings it into a new way that still feels very unique. Like when I'm reading Game of Thrones, there's nothing that feels like it, and it's like even though it has influences of other stuff, it's still very, very unique. And I've never found something that's like it or quite like it. So I feel the same way in the reverse, looking at Dragonbone chair, being like, I see where he got this stuff, but the way Tad does it is so original for a different reason.
And we'll kind of go back in history. We're reading from newer books and then go back older. I do very much agree with what you said, though. I mean, regarding the world building, it feels like a lot of modern fantasy series. I mean, I do love modern fantasy. I read more modern fantasy compared to the classic, but I feel like many of them, like, they forgot probably, or maybe shy away from diving full head on into the world building, And sometimes the world becomes, sad to say, forgettable despite the great story they're telling. And that's not the same
Yeah.
here. And we're just really we're just talking about Dragonbone share. We haven't even read the
Yeah.
rest of the series.
I
Yeah.
know. And the very small third book. I've just
Yeah.
I agree. I mean I love modern fantasy and I love modern epic fantasy, but I do feel like uh what you said, like the world building is just kind of it's changed in the sense of how it's developed between books that were written in the 90s and early 2000s and stuff that's written now. But
I mean, probably one of the main issue behind this is that, sorry to say, some readers are more impatient now with so many stories out there, so many,
yep.
well, entertainment. It can be pretty tiring to get sucked into learning about the new world, like for hundreds of pages. And that's kind of what happened, not even about the world, but the slice of life portion in Hayhold. It is one of the things that is so often discussed when we're talking about Dragonbone share. Everywhere, people felt bored in the first 200 pages, about 200 pages of the book,
Yeah,
where Simon was
before
practically, uh, well, doing nothing yeah, in Hayholt. How
just
do you
running
feel?
around the castle.
How do you feel about the pacing in Hayholt during the first part of the book?
Yeah, so I don't know. So I don't know if it was because I was just like so excited to finally be reading this book, but I really enjoyed the pacing of the first
Yeah.
third. I actually my biggest struggle when it came to pacing was the middle chunk, and I don't know why.
Mm,
But as it relates to Hayhold specifically, I really enjoyed it. I do feel like yeah, I could definitely see why some people say, "Oh, nothing's happening," because you are just getting a repetitive look of Simon running around the castle, looking at people, watching people, kind of like spying, and then going to visit Morgani's, and it kind of just felt like trying to think of something like it. I don't know, like the Black Cauldron or like those old like King Arthur, young, super young King Arthur and Merlin type setups, and I was like, this is interesting. Um, and I just wanted to learn more. Every time he was talking to Borgades, I was like, "There's so much more to this guy, and we're not getting it, and I need to know more." But I feel like I was actually surprised when everything kind of took off. Like when we found out that the brother was being like kept captive, and
oh yeah,
Simon
yeah,
Simon found him, and that whole led to the whole basically Morgani's finally dying and then Simon escaping. That whole thing, I was kind of caught off guard by. I was expecting that to happen much later in the book, and I was surprised
yeah.
that it happened in page 200 or so. And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. We're ramping up. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I felt like it allowed me to kind of get used to the characters in the world because I was kind of going in with an expectation that this was going to be a slow book and it was going to be a classic type atmosphere book. So I wasn't surprised by that. So I could see if someone was going in with a different expectation, how that could be cause a different result in that
Yeah, I
area.
agree.
How about
Def-
you?
I definitely agree with this one. I mean, probably would have not liked the Dragonbone chair in some other situation if I didn't know about the first 200 pages that people constantly talk about. I approached this thinking that the writing will be beautiful, and yes, Ted Williams definitely deliver on that. And also, the first part will be slow paced. And yeah, I approached with that mindset, and I entered it with thinking, okay, I'm just gonna sit and read and find out about the characters, find out about the world, and yeah, that's exactly what I got, and that's probably why I did not feel bored reading the first 200 pages at all.
Yeah. I feel like if that went on for another 200 pages and it didn't like all of the escape from Hayholt, I guess we can call it,
Yeah,
didn't happen till like page 500, I would feel differently, but I feel
yeah,
like it was almost a perfect amount of setup and introduction to what's going on before everything kind of took off. Um, and I think that's why I think that's why my only big issue with pacing was after all of that stuff kind of took off and then we start traveling, I felt
mm,
like when we get the whole gang together, we have Benedict and we have Simon and um,
been a bit.
they're like in the middle of part two. I just felt like now it felt like the whole momentum kind of dropped significantly. And then I was kind of like, okay, now what are we doing? I feel like we just had this whole like crazy event and what are we doing? So uh, that was my only big pacing issue, but it kind of ramped right back up towards the last third of the book.
Yeah, 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 I'd agree. I think, I can actually probably stand another 100 pages of just Simon in the Hayhold, before all that happened.
Oh yeah, yeah, me too. I think Tad Williams' like scene setting is so good. The way he was just writing everything, it reminded me of um I don't want to say it reminded me of Hob because it's similar to Hob, but I don't think it's quite the same. But I think similar to Hob in the way how she sets up the like Buckkeep and sets the scene for Buckkeep and like Fitz running around Buckkeep. I
Yeah.
just kept seeing that in Simon running around Hayholt, and I was like, this is really cool. I'm enjoying this.
Which one actually came out first? Assassin's Apprentice or this one? This one, right?
I think this one. Yeah, I think Assassin's Apprentice was 90.
Yeah, I think it's 90s. I think
96.
it's similar.
I don't know, something like that.
It's kind of similar to a Game of Thrones, I think.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
right
but
middle 90s.
yeah, but for this, I think people are correct though, because I don't know about you, but people told me that if you love Robin Hobb's prose, you will like Tad Williams' prose, and I really agree with that.
Yeah, his writing was awesome.
Yeah.
I think that was another reason why I was like totally fine with the first section of the book, because I could just tell that he was enjoying writing it. He was enjoying like introducing the world to the readers, and so for me, I was like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Because I think since we read a lot of fantasy, I think starting a new series can be very daunting, especially one that is big and epic and has all these histories and names and characters and stuff. And so I do appreciate when it feels like it's introduced in a way that's easy for me to grasp onto without feeling like overwhelmed all the time, because there are plenty of series that do that. So
Yeah.
having the series that kind of just that doesn't hold your hand, but allows you to just feel comfortable as everything starts to build up very quickly is very welcome. So I like that in Dragonbone Chair quite a bit.
Yeah, me too. And I really love magical swords. I don't know, but
Oh
this
yeah,
this one is so damn cool.
yeah. What
So cool.
that was so cool when we finally found out the history of like the three swords, and then that they were Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I was like, oh, okay, here that's I was like,
It's so
light bulb
badass,
going
right?
off. Oh yeah, I was like, this is awesome.
I completely agree with that. Okay, yeah. And also speaking about this, how do you feel about all the characters? Do you feel like they're all well written, or do you think Simon has too many focus compared to the others? I mean, obviously Simon is the main character here, but
Yeah,
with this kind of books, I think many kind of mentioned that Binabik is actually their favorite character in the entire series.
I like Benedict
Yeah.
quite a lot. This was another thing that surprised me. I think the way the first 200 pages go, Simon is such a focus that I was so caught off guard when we started getting POVs away from Simon. And we
Yeah.
started getting like chapters that had nothing to do with Simon. And I was like, wait, what? Where are we? And I feel like we're first getting this like 300 pages in the book. So I definitely think Simon's the focus, and I liked Simon enough. I think he was an enjoyable main protagonist. He's young. I like didn't really anything that I was bothered by. It wasn't something that super irritated me or anything. And he just seemed like he was this young kid thrown into this position that he wasn't expecting, like most of these epic fantasy series are that we kind of expect from now. Morgani's was really interesting. I think, as I was saying, he kind of reminded me of like a Merlin type figure.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Merlin.
Yeah, I just like every time Simon would go visit him in his lab or whatever, I was just I kept getting those vibes, and so I really enjoyed that. Benedict was probably my favorite character of this first book, though, and it didn't happen right away. I actually think the first couple of chapters with Benedict and Simon, I was like, this guy's kind of annoying. I wonder if he's gonna. I don't know what it was, but as the book went on, I was like, okay, I really started to enjoy his character, and then the whole last 300 pages of this book, I was just like, Benedict's awesome, and I feel like he's gonna have a huge role in this series, and so it's really cool to see that, because I think he was introduced in a way that felt natural, and he felt like kind of a replacement for Morgani's in a way that was like, okay, Morgani's is dead, so now let's introduce this new instructor or guide helper for Simon. But he's very distinctly different for Morghini's in a lot of ways that makes it easy to separate the two as a reader. So I don't know. I really like him, but I think most of the characters are good. I do think sometimes it got a little bit confusing when we were bounce between some of the side characters, like the kings and their families. I kept having to reference like a glossary or whatever to find out who is who. But I think that's just normal epic fantasy first book stuff.
That can always happen, And I don't know, because I haven't read the rest of the series yet. So for those of you who have read this, do not say something about this. Do you think Morghunis is dead or not?
Good point. Well, we never really see a body. I don't think. I think it happens, and then he leaves.
In a fire thing, right? That's it, right?
Yeah. Like a dark black magic type situation.
Yeah. For now, I'm going to lean into he's not dead yet. For now. Okay.
That would be really cool if he came back. I mean, I think. Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know. This is just assumption, okay?
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think for a series like this and fantasy, like we know, unless you see the person and they check his pulse and they're like, okay, he has 0 pulse, he's dead, then yeah, I mean, he definitely could still be living. But it was cool learning more about him after he was dead, like from Benedict and the other characters. I think Joshua brought in some more insight into Morghini's later. I thought that was really interesting, and it made me think back to Morghini's when he was alive, quote unquote, and just being like, wow, okay, this guy was awesome, and we didn't know it, even though I had a feeling about it, but I wanted to know more. So I would be very happy if he was still alive, but I genuinely have no idea.
I mean, there is still like so much history and things that could be told from Morghunis' story, right? I mean, just from the first book. I think that's what's amazing about some of the most epic fantasy series. Let's say, if the author want to do something like do another story told from another supporting character, they can always do that because he has built rich characters and also a rich world. And I think that is happening in the Dragonbone chariot with Morghunis as well, and many other characters in the book.
Yeah.
Just was that. Also, by the way, I don't know if you feel this. Do you feel weirded out by the character's name? I mean, like Joshua, Simon, John. These are not names that you usually find in epic fantasy series.
Yeah, they were. I thought Simon was just like Simon, really, like the first character. I was like, such an interesting character. What a name to go with. But yeah, it was a weird combination of these very common names, and then like Morghini's.
And then you have something like
Pirates and stuff.
Yeah, Pirates.
Yeah, like, who are these people?
Well, that's not a big issue or anything like that. But I just find it kind of funny because it felt odd. It felt odd to me. Yeah, and I agree with this one. I did not like Joshua at first, but I feel like he has developed quite a lot, especially in the second half of the book.
100%. I felt like very distanced from him. I think everything we knew about him was from what Simon's POV was and like what he had been told. And so I felt like we had a very kind of jaded view of him. And once Simon helps him escape, and then they finally go to Joshua, like later in the book, to where he's setting up camp. That's when I was like, okay, this guy's I like him a lot. I want him to. I'm glad we got him out of there because he was just, I don't know. I think it was just an exposure thing. I think in the first half, I just didn't really feel like I had any connection to him. I wanted him to get out and I wanted him to succeed just because I could tell that something was up with Elias and Pirates or Pirates is just was not helping the situation whatsoever.
Yeah. That guy is very evil.
Yeah, he's like textbook evil.
Yeah. For now, we still don't have many backgrounds and also motivation behind that guy. Yeah, he's just so evil at the moment. But I also agree with this one. I think this really should be a standard in fantasy.
Yes.
Yeah, man.
I completely agree. I'm trying to think. Like, so I'm reading The Heroes now, by Joe
Like
Abercrombie.
Abercrombie. Oh,
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
and they he has maps in the book, and I was
Mm.
reading it, and I was like, why does this? I mean, I kept stumbling upon new maps, and I was like, is this the first time we're getting maps from Joe Abercrombie, like in the book version that I have of the heroes? And I was like, wow, I could have really used a map and a character list for the original trilogy. I think that would just been super nice. And I just feel like there are a number of fantasy books like that. I don't think it hinders my enjoyment, but I think it
Mm.
absolutely elevates it and makes me feel
Yeah,
more comfortable with all the characters that are in there.
yeah, I agree. I agree. What would you say that what is your favorite parts in the book, in the Dragonbone chair? Like any moments that really stand out to you?
For sure. So I think the part where Simon is separated from Morgani's, and
Mm.
after we assume that he's dead, and Simon's like below Hayholt and is kind of escaping and is in the ruins and the tunnels of Hayholt for a long time and is like seeing
Mm.
all these what he thinks are visions and stuff. I love that part. I thought that was just very well done, and I was just like, what is going on? And it also, I feel like that foreshadowed kind of what we found out later about what Hayholt really is and like how old this whole city actually is and what's, you know, what these ruins actually represent. Um, so when he was down there and he kept finding these visions and then later finds out, oh, those weren't visions, like that stuff I actually saw, I was
Mm.
just like, oh, okay, this is awesome. Like I really enjoyed that. I think right after that, the whole scene where he stumbles upon uh Pirates and Elias exchanging, making like their deal with the devil type situation
Yeah,
going
yeah,
on.
yeah,
I thought that was cool, and it set up kind of like the big contention that is going on in this kingdom. When we found out about the swords, that whole world building lore drop was awesome. One
I
because it
absolutely
explained
love
the
them. I
yeah,
absolutely love them. I think the
it
first
was
one,
so good.
it's so good, man. It's, the first moment where Simon stumbles upon Elias like drawing Sorrow, right? Yeah,
Yes,
Sorrow.
yeah.
God, that moment is so vivid. I love it so much. It's just
Yeah,
pretty
I
cool,
was
you
just
know.
I was
And
it's always cool. Like I don't know, it's super little, but I love when like series and book titles are incorporated in the book in a way that makes it
mm,
feel like not super just on the nose. But Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, like I think those could represent more than just the swords that they're talking about. Like it obviously is encapsulating a lot of the whole atmosphere of this world, but at the same time, it's the names of the three swords. So I think
mm,
finding that out was just really cool because originally I was like, okay, this is a series about an ancient world with some sadness and violence. Memory,
yeah,
Sorrow, and
yeah,
Thorn. There we go. But
nice. That's very well put. Very well put. And I just think that in many epic fantasy, when every time there is a magical sword, that kind of is always a plus in my book.
oh yeah,
I know it sounds so simple, but I think as long that it's done well, like the case in this one, I mean,
mm,
just Sorrow alone, there's already like so many context and history behind this one sword, right?
oh yeah,
And then there's still Memory, there's still Thorn. It's cool, it's so damn cool. Like the
yeah.
previous wielder of Thorn, I forgot his name right now. The John's rival. Do you remember?
Um,
I forgot him.
I do not.
Yeah, yeah, but that guy. If someone in the comments know about his name, please do tell me. Yeah, but the first time we knew about Thorn was through the history that is told about him, and
Yeah,
even just from that one little text alone, it already felt like wow, this world is so rich with history. It is amazing how he done that.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Um, and I like how it kept little bits kept being dropped and built on each other. Like you kept finding little things out, and it add more context. And then once you had these big lore drops about like the Sithy and these other people, you were
City.
just like, "Whoa, this is this is awesome! It's all coming together." And
Kamaris. Yeah, Kamaris.
oh, Kamaris, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that guy.
I also the scene on the version of the Grim Oak Press book behind you, the cover
This
of
one. Yeah.
Simon battling the serpent dragon thing
Oh, damn. I
love
agree
that
with
whole
that.
scene.
Some people told me that this cover art is very misleading. I mean, well, I guess I kind of understand that this is not an action-oriented fantasy book, but
Yeah, no, it's
this
like the
thing do
one
happens.
scene.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
thing do happens.
I was curious. I don't know if because they never call them dragons. I don't believe. Do they call them dragons in the
Yeah,
book, or do
yeah.
they just call them like lizards?
I
Do
think
they
maybe.
have do they have wings? I don't know why I was like when I was reading they were describing the dragons. I was like, do these dragons have wings, or are these just giant flying lizards?
Okay, that is a good point. I do not think they actually mention any wings on that.
I don't know because I remember going on. I was like trying to Google like what these creatures look like because the only piece of art that I have of them is the Grim Oak version, and I kept seeing the same question on like on Reddit and stuff. Like, what do these are these dragons? The dragons that we assume them to be, or are these like just giant lizards without wings? And I was like, I don't
Uh,
know. Either way, it'd be cool, but
I think this is just my assumption though, because there is a lot of Japanese themes incorporated into the naming, and also
yeah,
even the Jingizu and all that. That's very Japanese inspired. And maybe, just maybe the dragons is also kind of like taken from Asian myth, because the
definitely.
dragons in Asian myth, sorry, the dragons in Asian myth doesn't have wings. They don't have
Yeah,
wings. They look like serpents, long serpents like that. So
yeah,
it could totally be because of that. Maybe.
yeah. That'd be awesome. I would love that.
Yeah. I don't think they have wings. Yeah. Yeah.
They're more
Yeah.
like giant worms.
I think you're right
Like,
about this.
yeah, that's what I was like. It's like Dune in the sky.
There is a tidbit about Uroboros, though, like the dragons that eat its own tail in
Yes,
this book.
they
Yeah,
kept talking about that, and I was like, the wheel weaves. I was like, oh
the
my
wheel
god.
wheels at the wheel wheels.
Yes. Oh god, Robert Jordan.
Robert
Yeah, I kept
Jordan.
seeing that too. Yeah, there was a couple little things like that I was seeing. Like, okay, I like Wheel of Time, A Song of Ice and Fire, definitely saw connections to both of those. And a couple other like one-offs I can't really think of off the top of my head, but you could definitely see how the series became a big like reference point and
Mhm.
inspiration for a lot of authors.
And you read this using the Grim Oak Press edition too, right?
I did. So I actually I had it on Kindle, and so I was reading it on Kindle, but I was like I was like going through the Grim Oak Press version too, so I could
Mhm.
follow the art and stuff because I love the
Oh, the
artwork.
artwork are gorgeous, man.
Yeah, it's so good. I'm just like I want to see the other. I'm excited for the other covers. I love artwork. That's why my favorite part of like special editions.
Yeah,
Um,
me
and
too.
like probably the biggest driver of which ones I get and don't get if I like the artwork or not, because it's just something you don't get a lot of. I think this is a series I was looking up fan art, and there's just not a lot of fan art for Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn.
Yeah, it's quite shocking.
And
Quite shockingly.
yeah, and I was like, I feel like the series could have some awesome art. And like Michael Whalen, I love his cover arts for this series, especially the Green Angel Tower one is awesome.
Mhm.
I just wish there was more.
Yeah, me too. I agree. The first time they entered Daichikiza, I think that's the name of the place. I think because there is the addition of the artwork, I think it was such a beautiful moment.
Oh yes, yeah,
And I think they met the giant there, right, for the first time, right? They met the
yeah,
giant there.
I
Yeah,
think so.
that's another one that I did not expect. I just don't see giants that many in comparison to dragons in epic fantasy.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only other series I can think of off the top of my head is Faithful and the Fallen. Definitely does the giants.
Mm, mm.
Um, like it's definitely. I mean, Song of Ice and Fire does it, but like, there's definitely series that have it, but it's usually not the forefront of creatures that are the focus of the world.
Yeah, yeah, agree. So we should probably talk about the world building.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest draw, maybe even the biggest draw of the book and the series, really, for me anyway. Because yeah, as we talked about earlier, this one really, really made me realize just how much we are missing about this in many epic fantasy books now.
Yeah.
So much, like, just brush them off. I mean, it's not like saying many other fantasy authors now forgot to do world building, but they're just not as detailed and how do I say this, livable. yeah, as livable like the one that is shown in the Dragonbone chair.
Oh, I agree. And I feel like you get the double expectation of you want more world building, but I think there's this assumption that the more world building there is, the longer the book is, the longer the series has to be. And I actually think that Dragonbone Chair showed why that's not always the case. Like, yes, I know To Great Angel Tower is a very long book, but the first book, I feel like there was a ton of world building done really well in the Dragonbone Chair. And even though it is a long book, I felt like um, there was just a ton of history poured on you, and some of it was like done info dumpy in the middle section. I think when we were trying to learn more about the history and stuff, and I enjoyed that. But I think that it's just something I miss from some modern fantasy, and it's not like always a bad thing. I think some series are way more zoomed in on specific stories in a big world, so like they don't really care about some of the history of this world. They're really focused on like a one character's revenge story or something like that. Whereas here, it's just, they're getting tied into a conflict that is rooted in this ancient power and ancient rivalry and stuff. So they have to learn about the history of the world. And so I love that. And I wish we got more of it. Like, I think Tad, if he wanted to, could write a Fire and Blood version of the history of like parts of this world, and like the old races and just like the kingdoms before. And I think
we already kind of get that. I think it's in the novella titled Brothers of the Wind.
Oh, nice. Okay, I knew. Nice. Okay.
Yeah, but I haven't read that one. I know that people told me that it is okay to read Brothers of the Wind first before even reading this one. But yeah, I do not think I will. I don't know. We will discuss that, because it describes the details of the rivalry between the twins that became so important in the context of this. Well, of the conflict that Simon's facing right now, the Storm King. Yeah, the Storm King.
Storm King.
Yeah.
That was the Storm King. I was like, I love that name, and I just feel like I feel like authors have been inspired by that. I feel like I've heard that in other fantasy books, but I don't know. But for some reason, the Storm King, I thought that was an awesome title.
Oh, it's very awesome. Yeah.
Dark Souls, Elden Rings have giants. Yeah, they do.
Oh yeah, they do, definitely. We are talking basically only on fantasy novels, because of video games, giants do appear a lot.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure.
I haven't read the book yet, but how similar is? I think we talked about this earlier, but not too similar, right, Alex? Probably just inspirations and all that.
Yeah, I do think the way the story is actually structured is really interesting, because you get this kind of zoomed in look at Simon for the first chunk of the book. And then it kind of expands and you start seeing multiple different people in power from their point of view. And then you see the point of view of like Elias and Pirates and stuff. And you just start bouncing around from different characters throughout this realm after we had already been quite established with Simon. And I thought that was a very interesting way to take it. And like I said earlier, I think once we got our first other than Simon chapter, which was like 200 pages into the book, I was like, caught me off guard, but I really enjoyed it. And I think I can totally see why, like, it's not necessary. It's definitely not the same type of multi POV that George does in A Song of Ice and Fire by bouncing, like just how well done that is. It's very different and much subtle and less frequent in the Dragonbone chair, but I think it really helps the expansion of the world and kind of everything that's going on. And I liked that structure because it also added to the fact that this book has like three main sides. Like, yes, it's split into 3 parts, I believe. I don't think it's 4. I think it's 3 parts, but each part feels very different from the other. I feel like part 1 is, your classic fantasy introduction. Part 2 is like the traveling and the building of the fellowship in a way, give or take. And then part 3 is the whole, let's find the sword and get on our quest type thing. And I really like that. I don't think it's similar to A Song of Ice and Fire in the way the story moves or anything like that. So I think if you're worried about that, don't be. I think it's it has elements of it, but
I completely agree with this. I do not feel like Song of Ice and Fire, like it's similar to this one. I mean, I can definitely see how people who like or dislike this one felt the other way around on A Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely possible. Yeah. And what do you think about the city?
So cool. Like, I love it. I mean, I love the history there,
Yeah.
and I love when people's expectations of something are totally challenged when they are confronted with it, and
Hmm.
especially in fantasy. So like here, like Simon has a very specific expectation of the city from what he has learned growing up in Hayholt, and so he kind of comes head to head with that when he meets and encounters the city and outside of Hayholt in like wherever they are in this part of the world. And I really like that because I think it can be frustrating to have a character that feels like they're not jaded, but they are kind
Yeah.
of jaded in the sense of what they think of certain groups of people and stuff. And so once that changes and once it's challenged and they realize, oh wow, there's so much more to these people, and there's a reason that the city are who they are and like where they are in this world and like how much of was taken from them and all of these different things was I loved it. Like
Yeah.
I loved that aspect of it.
And Simon is also learning a lot of things through Binabik, right? Binabik is telling and teaching him many stuff. I think that's also why Binabik becomes such a lovable character, and their friendship
Yeah.
is so well built. Yeah, they felt
For
genuine.
sure.
I really like their friendship.
Yeah, I agree. And it's yeah, that's what I say. They play off each other very well. And
Yeah,
I feel like you can see I felt like I could see Simon maturing a little bit through the book, and Benedict was kind of like a springboard for that along the on the way. I just thought the way they bounced off each other was really well done. The other thing that was cool was the white feather, like when Simon gets
oh
shot with
yeah,
the white arrow, and
what
then
arrow? Yeah.
he eventually meets a person. He's like, "Oh, you're the person that shot me with the white arrow." Or like, "Do you have?" He brings the white arrow. That whole piece of the lore was
Yeah.
awesome.
It's so awesome, and I love how it came back to it already in this one. I thought we would be seeing back the revelations or maybe the reward of getting that white arrow like later on in the series, but we got it. We got it already here. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I agree.
Simon's journey. Also, we've been calling him Simon, but is it Simon or
Simeon.
Simon?
It's I don't know.
Yeah,
I know. Well, his original name
it's
was
it's
Simeon
Seoman.
Steelman. Yeah, and then it was shortened. Like that's I forget the situation around it. Wasn't like his mom wanted to be called Seoman, and then
Yeah. And then Rachel the
Rachel,
dragon.
Rachel the dragon. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like, I am not calling him that. It's way too complicated. Shortening it. But
And then Rachel the dragon just decided to name him Simon or Simon because it's the most similar one to Seoman.
yeah. But I agree with this. I think his journey of discovery is
Yeah.
awesome. And I think that's why I'm so glad that Tad spent such a large chunk of the first third of this book with him, like with his POV, and kind of having that be the filter that you're seeing this world through, because as you're learning more about the world, so is the main character. And I just think the way that's coupled allows one, I felt more attached to him as the story went on, and I could feel him growing and learning more. And I also felt myself learning more for the
Yeah.
same reason. I just think it was, I think it happens all the time with epic fantasy when authors do that. But I think Tad, obviously, being this book that was written in the late 80s,
Yeah.
I think, it's probably one of the big first ones that did it to this level.
And people, I know that people kind of scared of epic fantasy, especially with books like Malazan and all that. They're not. I get it. They're not the easiest kind of books to read. They're challenging, intimidating, and they really force us to we have to be patient and learn many things. But I feel like with this one, it really guides you along this path. That's easy path, and then you keep on growing with Simon. You learn about the world together. And it's all done in a really seamless way. It felt like it's so natural.
Yeah. And it never feels like you can't catch your breath or anything. I feel like
Mm.
for every climactic moment, and like there's not a ton in this book. This book is very much, there's a lot of setup, but
Yeah.
after the big moments in this book, you do get a long breather where the characters are experiencing the downfall of it, and
Yeah.
they're trying to figure out what to do next. And so I like that. I think it really makes a good like avenue for readers who are just trying to find their footing for epic fantasy. It makes it easy for them to do.
I did thought about that. Do you think the language will be too difficult though for newcomers to this one? Because I know that I know many readers do found their joy for reading fantasy through Dragonbone share. But
Yep.
when I was reading this one, let's say I was reading this like probably a decade ago, for example, I do not think I will end up enjoying it as much as I do now because I feel like the language is not that easy. Yeah, that's just my perspective because English is my third language. So,
Yeah.
how do you feel about this?
I think it would totally depend. I think
Uh,
if it's someone who, I don't know, this is tricky because it's like if someone is a big reader and they just
mhm,
don't read fantasy and they're just trying to come into fantasy, then I think they'd be okay. But also, I could totally see why a book, because for as much as I love Tad's writing and I love this book,
mm,
I do agree with you that it might be a tough sell for someone who is trying to find something to get them into the genre. I think the
yeah.
same thing is because it's like Lord of the Rings is kind of the same way. I love Lord of the Rings. Don't get me wrong. I
Mm,
don't think I would give it to someone who has never read fantasy to be like, read this and this will represent fantasy, because even though in my eyes I like love that series to death and it means a
mm,
lot to me, I just feel like it wouldn't be my choice for someone to get it. I think it would just be too tough for they get bored and they wouldn't
yeah.
like the language. It'd be hard for them to relate to and feel like comfortable with. And I feel like you could totally get that same way here. I'd almost say that's where that's where George that's where George's prose has a really big strength. I think the way George writes his books is very accessible for
Yeah.
despite the size of them and how much is going on. And I just think Tad is a little bit more kind of like Hobb in the way that there's a lot of words and he's taking his time and enjoying what he's talking about. And if you're kind of feeling overwhelmed by it all, I don't know if it's gonna help.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. You mentioned a great point though about the Lord of the Rings because I bounced off Lord of the Rings so many times, so many times. I mean, I read a lot of fantasy books. Even after reading a lot of fantasy books, I still bounced off the Lord of the Rings. It just felt like, well, you know how it is with Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah.
I like it. I like it. I definitely will not well, I will not disagree with it that this is one of the most important, maybe even the most important fantasy series we have right now. But for current standard, it can be quite difficult and challenging to actually read the language from my perspective, especially if we're not familiar with the epic fantasy genre. That's
Yeah.
my take anyway. And also, speaking of Tolkien, I mean, this one, the prose actually kind of reminded me of reading Tolkien's. I don't know why. It's like the melancholic tone to it.
I got that. The atmosphere is definitely similar. That like
Yeah,
melancholic, yeah, for sure. Um,
yeah.
I think Tolkien's a little bit more heavy-handed when it comes to the prose and like just
Hmm.
the classic feeling prose. Um, I don't think Tad is as far into that, but I definitely see the similarities, and the atmosphere felt very similar. Which, like, as fan of Lord of the Rings, I dug. I thought it was awesome, but I think, yeah, I think that's a reason. I think that it could be another reason why this is a tough series. Why the series has not risen to the popularity that it could be, and
Yeah.
like as we said, I think marketing has a big reason for it. I think marketing for any series success, especially one that is good, but doesn't seem to have the success publicly as it
Hmm.
probably should. Marketing definitely plays a big role. So um, that's definitely an aspect. But I could feel like the accessibility for someone who is just coming into fantasy, even though it reads fairly straightforward, I think it's more accessible than Lord of the Rings for sure.
Hmm.
I still think it might be tough for a new fantasy reader.
I do hope many people do pick it up though.
Oh my god, yeah, me
Yeah.
too. I don't want anyone to be daunted by that. I think it's wonderful, and I think Tad's writing is very, very good, and
It's beautiful. It's really
yeah,
beautiful.
it is really like I heard that going into it, and I kind of expected it, and I was happily surprised, like happily like impressed that yeah, it was as good as I wanted it to be.
Yeah, and this is a related question. Do you think this series could ever get more popular? I highly think so.
For
Yeah,
sure,
I
I think
think
so
it
too.
should. It really should. That's the most important point. It really should. It contained like all the elements that some of the most popular and well-known fantasy series we have now, like Stormlight Archive or A Lord of the Rings, George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire, and all that. It really has all those elements, and yeah, I think it deserves to be that popular, for
Yeah,
my take anyway.
yeah, no, I agree, and I think that even though we've only read the first book,
Mm,
I feel like because this is a kind of it seems like a closely packed story with the
mm.
3 books. It could be a good adaptation. I think
Oh yeah,
could
yeah.
also be an adaptation that could bomb drastically. I think depending on how they adapted it. Like it
Oh
just
no.
seems like one of those class. It seems like one of those classic fantasy stories that if that reminds me of bad fantasy adaptations back in the day, and I would just be like, don't ever do that. But if like HBO got it, I'd be like, yes, okay, I trust you. This could be awesome because there's just a
Yeah,
lot here. There's a lot here um, that I think a lot of people would love, and they just haven't been exposed to it.
yeah, I agree. Definitely agree. And do you think the book will benefit from more actions? I actually think some of the charm of Dragonbone Chair is the minimum action in it. I feel like because of the minimal actions, like for example, let's compare this to, I think you have read this, right? The Faithful and the Fallen by John Witt.
Yep.
Yeah, so that book is kind of similar, not the writing, but the storytelling structure is kind of similar.
Just
Like the
yeah.
first half of that book can be considered very slow paced. It's just us with the characters and also Corbin exploring, well, everything. And that can be kind of similar to this one, but when the actions pop, it really explodes. I think that's what's delivered in the Dragonbone Chair. And do you think the book will actually benefit from having more actions though?
Um, I think it would have to be. It would depend on how it's done. I really liked how it was set up and kind of. It's like a very good introduction to this story,
Hmm.
and the action in it. It makes the action that's in it land much harder. I think it would have been cool at the end, or not cool, but I guess it would be cool to get
Hmm.
see more action of like some of the battles that were happening, see
Yeah, yeah.
more of that. But I also at the same time, it might have felt unnecessary. It's like not the point of what the story Tad was trying to tell. So I also respect kind of what his focus was. Um, but I think the I don't know because I think sometimes when you have a lot of action, it can take away from the emotional weight behind
Yeah.
situations that are happening. And I think Dragonbone Chair, despite being like, oh, it's a in many ways it's a charming traditional fantasy, traditional-ish first book in a fantasy series. There's a lot of like heavily emotional stuff that you're experiencing, and that Simon's like learning about
Hmm.
his world and his place in the world, and the city people, and Elias and his king, and then dealing with death. And I think all of that hits way harder based on how, as a result of how the book is written. Um,
Hmm.
Now that being said, I think in the sequels, I have no idea what to expect. I would like to see more action, but I think it would always depend on how it's done. I think if we just went full 180 and it was just a book of all action, nonstop action, I'd be like, this doesn't even. I think it would just fall flat for me. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
I agree with that. I don't know about you, but generally speaking, when it comes to fantasy series, I actually don't mind the first book being slow or minimum of actions. I think it's
Yeah,
most of the time it's actually better for me. Yeah.
I agree, and it gives me a chance to like connect more with the characters. Feel
Mm,
like sometimes if there's a ton of action in first book, if I don't feel connected to the characters and like you have deaths happening,
it's pointless,
there's a
man.
lot. I'm like, literally wait one book, and I would have felt drastically more invested in this
Yeah.
death than it happening right now. So I feel like that's just a trap that authors, and I know that publishers could have an influence on that too these days by being like, oh, this is your first published book into this new series you want to launch. Like you gotta have it, you gotta make it gripping for readers, and sometimes people associate high action with gripping, and it's not always the case.
Yeah, completely agree. So I think we have discussed about this book quite a lot. So I think we will just talk about one more final thing, and that is to talk about our final thoughts on the Dragonbone chair. So
Yeah.
I will let you go first. What do you think about it?
Okay.
Do you have some criticisms? Do you think like noticeable criticism on this book?
So overall, I really loved this book. I was actually kind of nervous going into it because I wanted to like it, based on what I had heard from like Jimmy and Mike, as I was saying. It sounded like something I would really enjoy. It was like, if you like A Song of Ice and Fire and you like Robin Hobb, you'll probably like this. And I was like, okay, well, those are both things I love. I hope I like this. And I'm happy I did. I think it was a really good introduction to this world. The characters I really enjoyed. I loved the world building, and I loved the stuff that we were learning about this world. I like learning more about the history of the Hayholt and the Green Angel Tower, and like this whole city of like what this stuff is. And it only my criticism is not really a criticism, because it's like, for every one piece of information we got, I had 12 more questions I had about it.
Yeah.
There's stuff I want to learn more about, and I'm sure we'll get it in the next two books, and even the sequel series. And I'm excited for that. I think, as I was saying, I think with the amount of fantasy that like we read, especially like you read a lot of fantasy, and I've been reading much more fantasy lately than I ever have been. And so I think it's very difficult sometimes to find a book one in a series that manages to grab you and and hold your attention enough to make you excited to pick up the next book, because there's just so much fantasy out there. And a lot of times you can read similarly. And I felt like for the Dragonbone chair, I really enjoyed it. I was so invested in the characters and the stakes, and the ending of it. I was like, I'm excited for Stone of Farewell, and I was like ready to jump into it right then. And I'm really excited to just see where the story goes. Not gonna lie, I am daunted by the size of Green Angel Tower, but I feel like, I'm also reading Malazan at the same time, so it's gonna be okay.
Oh, you're reading Malazan right now?
Right? Yeah, right now.
Oh my God! What are you doing?
Yeah, we're doing one of those every 2 months, which is making it a little bit more digestible. But yeah.
Okay, my thoughts is pretty much the same as you, and that's not a criticism, as you said. But every time I learn about something new, it always makes me okay. I want to learn more about this. I want to learn again about this one. It's crazy. I think that's just a sign of strength of how good it was, though. I really like how the world is so vivid. I don't know about you, but I can see images in my mind when I read a book. I know that other readers sometimes don't. Do you feel that way or not?
It totally depends. I feel like the more invested in a book I am, the more I can like visualize everything.
Okay.
And then sometimes, sometimes like an author's prose and stuff could really make it hard for me to start seeing that stuff. And while I'm following the story, I will be constantly pulled out of the story for various reasons. So it's definitely book to book. It's not always the most visual experience for me, which is definitely interesting.
Yeah, I definitely loved it so much, and also agree that the characters really were well written and the writing was beautiful. Also, if you are watching this somehow and you haven't read the book yet, if you love Robin Hobb's books, really do give it a try. I think the prose it's really akin to Robin Hobb's style. Robin Hobb's now more popular, I think, in the booktube community compared to Ted Williams' books. But yeah, I think that's really a great comparison. I was sold on that, and I think it will sell to a lot of people as well. And this one, reading this book took me back.
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
This reminded me of like the earliest fantasy I was reading in a good way. Like,
it's just kind of weird how sometimes text can give that kind of feeling,
Yeah, like nostalgia for.
Yeah, I know that
in a different way.
But that's so true. I agree, Frank. This one is so true. Also, you should see this one. I hate this,
Mitch.
It's okay though, Mitch. Seriously, I mean, this book is not for everyone. Like all books, even Lord of the Rings, right?
Oh yeah.
it's not for everyone. It's completely okay to not like it.
I actually think this is one of those books. If someone tried it, and like got 100 pages in, and I was like, I really don't like it, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean,
Yeah,
I just think it's a very specific type of experience, and I also think it's one of those that you kind of need to be in the particular mindset to read it and allow yourself to get invested in it, because yeah, it is slow and it definitely will, it requires patience and some attention, but I think the payoff is really worth it, and I'm excited to see what happens in the next books.
yeah. And there's a question for you, Alex.
I am.
Oh,
I am. So I've read the Prince of Nothing, and then I
Oh.
haven't read the sequels. So
I
believe
haven't
Prince of Nothing is Prince of Nothing was so good. I was like about to jump right into Second Apocalypse, or Aspect Emperor right away.
Mhm.
But I'm gonna be reading it with Joanna, and I think Philip
Okay.
too. And I think we're gonna be doing it once we're done with the Song of Ice and Fire, because we have one more book left in Song of Ice and Fire, like in our read along. So we're doing Dance with Dragons soon, and so once that's done and that live show's done, then we'll move on to the next one. I just think there's a lot of books.
You're juggling a lot of very ambitious epic fantasy series right now.
Oh my gosh, on literally the month of memories of, what was it? Storm of Swords, Memories of Ice, and something else. I don't know. It was a lot, but
that's in a month.
That's what I did like 2 months ago. But that was like my whole month. And last month, I read Feast for Crows. I think I was like kind of in a slump, and it took me like 3 weeks to read. But nothing about that book. It just took me a while.
Oh my god! And I think this is the last one. Some have bashed slowness on YouTube. Yeah, but to be fair, we can understand. We do, I mean, personally, I love the slow part of it, but I can certainly see how it bounced off other readers. It's really possible. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a common thing in fantasy. I think there's plenty of fantasy that could be considered slow, and especially in epic fantasy, because you have just way more scope and word count to play with, and so they're gonna spend more time doing like the slow stuff to like introduce, like build characters and set up stakes and stuff. So I think it's just a common thing, and some readers just really don't vibe with it, and some do, and I usually do, but I think Tad's writing for sure is a big contributor to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I guess that's about cover it for the topic of the Dragonbone chair. Really, thank you, Alex, for joining this, and also thank you to all of you, really, for joining the read along with both of us. And we will be talking about A Stone of Farewell probably at the end of this month, or probably at the beginning of next month, right?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I can't wait for that one. Probably. When are you planning on starting it? Like
very soon. It's kind of hard to resist it now.
I know.
Yeah. I really want to. I'm reading a book right now. I don't know if you heard, but it is called The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi.
Oh, yeah. I read that. I read that 2 months ago.
Did you like it?
I enjoyed it. Yeah, I actually didn't know what to expect. And I thought it was good. It was like, it felt very different to the other stuff I've been reading, so I like that aspect of it. I don't think it's not one of those books I've thought a lot about since finishing it, but I enjoyed it. It was a fun, adventurous time when I was reading it. But
yeah, so my plan right now is to read that, and then after that, I will start The Stone of Farewell, and then we'll see.
Awesome.
I think Stone of Farewell is actually a little bit shorter compared to Dragonbone Chair, but after that, we will have the big one to read Age of Power, and then we will decide how to tackle that one.
Do that one, and then I know we want to do the sequel series too, and he pushed the other book, the book 4, to next year, so we'll adjust accordingly. But
we will adjust to that one. Probably do one book every 3 months or something, maybe.
yeah, I mean that works.
Yeah, maybe something like that. But we will definitely keep you posted, and also the Stone of Farewell discussion will be posted on Alex's channel. Yeah, we'll be talking on Alex's channel there. Hopefully, I will get to see many of you there again. And seriously, Alex, thank you so much for coming to my channel. And thank you to all of you. I hope all of you have a great day. And if you haven't read the series, somehow do read the series along with us. Bye.
See you, everyone.